We want to get into some updates in the Bryan Kohberger saga that we have followed very, very closely, really from the very beginning, because there's this new twist, there's a new angle in this having to do with his parents. But Kohberger, he was in a courtroom in Idaho this week, the judge entering a not guilty plea on his behalf after Kohberger stood silent beside his team of lawyers. But now Kohberger's parents being called to testify in front of a Pennsylvania grand jury. Remember, that's where they're from. In the case of a missing woman, her name Dana Smither. For more on why his parents are testifying in this specific case, we want to bring into the conversation legal expert and friend of the program, Jacqueline Goodman. She joins us now. Jacqueline, good to see you. Thanks for being with us on this Thursday night. You were following this today. I think a lot of people who have followed this case very, very closely are asking themselves, what's going on with this other entirely separate case of this missing woman, Dana Smither, and what do they potentially think Bryan Kohberger could have had to do with it?
Well, it's interesting. The police department has said that they have zero evidence. They didn't even qualify that statement. They said they have zero evidence linking that case to Bryan Kohberger. And yet you have a grand jury who is asking to hear testimony from his parents in connection with that case. And so, we're left to speculate because the grand jury connects together in secret and we don't get to know what it is that they're thinking, and we can only speculate by virtue of the witnesses that are called. So the fact that his parents are being called in connection with that case on what looks like a murder that occurred about 30 miles away from the Kohberger home is certainly subject to speculation.
Jacqueline, when you get a subpoena like the parents did, they tried to fight it. It was unsuccessful. Did they have any grounds to not comply with the subpoena in this? Can you just say, you know what, I'm not going to comply with this. We have no business with this. What are you even talking about? Was that on the table here?
They can't not comply. They'd be found in contempt. Even a suspect doesn't have a right not to appear before a grand jury, and you've seen that litigated in sometimes very complex political questions. So no, they didn't have a right not to appear before the grand jury and to testify truthfully. And they don't really even have a Fifth Amendment or other kind of privilege not to answer certain questions. They don't have a right to have counsel in the grand jury. And so it's really an opportunity, I think, for the prosecution to gain information about that case if they're so inclined, and it appears that they are.
So I want to put up this statement that we made here from the police department there in Pennsylvania looking into this, the Stroudsburg Police Department saying this. They're aware of the many currently reported news articles in which various media outlets have reported connections between Dana Smither's missing person investigation and the Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger. The SARPD has no evidence, all caps, that Dana Smither's disappearance is in any way, all caps, tied to Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger, to what you were alluding to right off the top there. So you're saying essentially that the Kohberger parents, they could have information, but it has nothing to do with what Bryan Kohberger allegedly did there in Moscow, Idaho.
Well, I think what's more important is that they're saying at this time they have no evidence, but the parents' testimony is not part of that calculation. And so it's possible that the parents' testimony before the grand jury changes that calculus and they may take a different tack. I think it's really an evidence gathering, a discovery process for the prosecution to have the parents come and testify at this grand jury. It's really, it's a remarkable opportunity really for the prosecution to gain information and to sort of force people who otherwise may feel like they would rather not speak to law enforcement, force them to speak on the record on a case that they're investigating. And so we'll see whether or not there's developments in that cold case.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to Idaho now and kind of do the flip side, because do you think prosecutors, now that this is going on there in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, do you think they can bring this up in his trial that's coming up in October? Hey, your parents, they were asked questions of in this missing woman's disappearance. We're going to talk about this in Bryan Kohberger's trial. He's stand accused of murdering those 4 University of Idaho students. Could that be in the mix here?
Probably not. There's a general rule that evidence of prior misconduct is not admissible to prove conduct in conformity with this character trait, if you will, for criminal behavior generally, to prove conduct in conformity with that trait in another instance. So in the Idaho case with the 4 alleged victims, Bryan Kohberger is probably not going to have, at least as far as we can tell at this time, any questions, or the witnesses on the defense are not going to have to deal with any implications based on what we know so far on this other cold case. Now that could change, of course, because it seems to be in the infancy of the investigation. But so far, no. There are exceptions to that general rule that keeps out that kind of called character evidence, which are things like identity, for example. If they want to prove motive, identity, modus operandi, there are many, many exceptions to the general rule. And so if we can show that a crime was committed in largely the same way, that might show some, for example, if there's sort of a mark of Zorro on the body in each of the instances, that might identify him to the case in chief. And so it really depends on the facts of the case and how they play out. But generally speaking, so far, no, just too speculative, too different.
Okay, but aside from the missing woman case that the parents have to testify in and are, could they just be brought to testify and be basically character witnesses to their son there in the trial in Idaho? Do you think that'll happen? Do you think he'll testify?
Either side can call the parents or anybody else to testify about the character, the lack of perhaps bad characteristics of Mr. Kohberger, character traits that might be inconsistent with the commission of this kind of a crime to prove his innocence in this case, or vice versa. The prosecution can call witnesses if they think they have evidence of character traits that would be consistent with someone who would commit this kind of crime. And, speculating about whether Mr. Kohberger is going to testify is really difficult. And often we don't know until the trial itself whether our clients are going to testify. Often they're the last witness to testify in a trial because that decision is made game time, really.
Yeah. Because I was just lastly, it just seems that this reeks of, opening a can of worms. If a police department nationwide thinks that relatives of a very high-profile murder suspect like Bryan Kohberger, any of his relatives, like his parents or even himself, could be basically, corresponding to or relating to some completely separate crime, completely separate case, that they can go get a subpoena, bring them before a grand jury, and question them. You're saying that is just de rigueur. That is standard. They can do that, right? No?
No. They can't testify. They can't call the parents to testify that they were called as witnesses in another potential case. No.
Okay.
The fact that the other case exists, the fact that there may be some evidence to link the two cases, maybe. And as to character traits that are relevant in this case in Idaho, yes. So I think that the question if the question is whether the parents can come and testify about the fact that they were called as witnesses in this grand jury, absolutely not. No, they can't.
Okay, yeah, because essentially, I should have started with this, because this was the link there. The woman's disappearance, Dana Smithers in Pennsylvania, it was close to the Kohberger parents' home there and the school where Bryan Kohberger went there in Pennsylvania. So it seems like that was really some of the connection that they latched onto. Of course, we won't know until it's unsealed what more they have. But Jacqueline Goodman, we always appreciate your insight into these major legal headlines, and we'll definitely be speaking again. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.